Sean here. This time I'm at the Long Bar in the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, having an iconic Singapore Sling. There we go. This thing is amazing. I'm not even going to get into what's in it, but anyway, thought I'd quickly get into, just record a video while I'm here. One thing that's come up a little bit of recent times has been supported residence. So now, most people know about RAD. They're quoted RADs the moment they're walked into an aged care facility, so they know exactly what a RAD is. And it's like an advertised price that you pay. However, there's a bit of a misconception, though, if you're under the current threshold for low means residence, which is around $193,000 as of September 23, that you won't have to pay a RAD. So that's true. You won't have to pay a RAD. And unless you move rooms or anything else, you'll never have to pay a RAD either. But that doesn't mean that there won't be other costs outside the basic daily fee. Now, that's generally the case for someone whose assets are under the $57,000, where you're fully supported. But what I really want to talk about are partially supported people between 57 and 193 roughly, if we just talk about assets. So if I had to put this in a nutshell, basically what happens is that everything goes into a government formula that works out how much you need to pay. So typically, if you're a person being assessed on around, call it $120,000 worth of assets or anything really, the more you have, the more you're going to pay. But the way they work this out is there's a formula that will eventually work out what's called a daily accommodation contribution, or a DAC. And so with that DAC, what then happens afterwards is that the DAC then gets converted into a RAC, a refundable accommodation contribution. Basically, whatever that fee comes up as, multiply it by 365, divide it by the interest rate at the time, which, on a side note, the higher the interest rate is, lower that RAC is. And then what happens is you'll come up with the refundable accommodation contribution amount, which is basically like a bond in the same way that a RAD is, that you can basically put that same amount of RAC into, pay that bond to make that daily fee go away, just in the same way that if you make a RAD payment, it makes the daily accommodation payment go away. Now, there's a little bit more complexity around supplements and everything else that I'm not going to get into, not for now, because I want to get back to enjoying my drink, my awesome, and on a random note, there's all these nuts on the ground. So I've got that. And in a fancy bar like this, it's acceptable to throw everything on the ground. So that's pretty cool. But so in a nutshell, though, if I'm to summarize here, is that if your assets, generally speaking, accessible for a person, or if you're part of a couple, halve it. And if it gets to that, if they're between $57,000 and $193,000 currently, of course, income plays a role in this, but for most pensioners, we're not going to talk about this. If it does come into it, then effectively you will have to make a contribution towards your accommodation. But unlike an advertised RAD where you know exactly what you're going to pay, where you might choose a $400, $600 or a $2.2 million room, or realistically somewhere in between, with a RAC, it depends completely on your own assets and your own income, which is great because what you can do is we have control over some of these things with our shelter strategies, things like funeral bonds, annuities, investment bonds in trust. There's a whole bunch of different shelter strategies, spouse's name, that we can use, but we can actually control that. But there are some extra complexities around the facility supplements and how many of their residents are low means, or if it's standard, or refurbished. But we're not going to get into that today. The main point that I want to highlight at the end of this video is that if when you go in as a supported resident, partially supported resident, or a low means resident, if your assets are between $57,000 and $193,000, then there's a very good chance you will make a contribution to your accommodation. And there's some strategies that you can put in place to reduce your costs and even to reduce that contribution, which will continue to be assessed every 3 months. So, and the only other one that I'll throw in at the end of this is that changes to your housing situation, especially if there's someone else in the home, can have a significant change here. So anyway, that's all I've got for today's video. I'm going to get back to, look at this bar, look how lovely this place is. I'm going to get back to enjoying my drink and probably have something after this. Cheers.